Alright guys, it's Jerningam here. We're going to be filming some more of Jeremy Corbyn's speech. He's talking about Boris Johnson, about he will not prorogue Parliament and he will not stop or whatever else. And Jeremy Corbyn's full of it, I think. I don't support Labour. I'm more of a Conservative person myself. Not everybody follows politics and stuff, but there we are. Let's press play.
The Prime Minister acted illegally when he tried to shut down opposition to his reckless and disastrous plan to crash out of the European Union without a deal. But he has failed. He will never shut down our democracy or silence the voices of us, the people. Boris Johnson has been found to have misled the country. This unelected Prime Minister should now resign. That would make him the shortest serving British Prime Minister in history, and rightly so.
I think Jeremy Corbyn's full of it, guys.
This is a born-to-rule government of the entitled, who believe that the rules they set for everyone else don't apply to them. Let me quote the Supreme Court's decision conclusion. I quote, "Unlawful, null, and of no effect, and should be quashed." They've got the Prime Minister down to a T. This crisis can only be settled with a general election.
General election again. It's stupid.
That election needs to take place as soon as this.
Jeremy Corbyn's stupid in my opinion, guys. He wants general election, Article 50, referendum, that's all he says.
I disagree profoundly.
It's Boris Donald Trump, USA,
Thank
guys.
you very much, everyone. It's great to be with my friend Boris Johnson. Just got a position that he's having a very easy time with than he thought. I was just saying, is it tougher or easier? He said, well, it's, I guess what he expected. I think it's pretty much what he expected. And he's doing a fantastic job, not easy, and but doing a really good job. I think it's come October. Come a great country.
October the 31st.
The results are going to start to show in November. But it looks to me like he is an honor to have you here. We're going to be discussing trade. We can quadruple our trade with UK, and we can, I think, really do a big job. Bob Lighthizer is here, our trade representative. Your trade representative is here, and they're already scheduled today to continue negotiations. But we can have substantially more trade with UK, and we look forward to doing it. So, we'll talk about other things also. It's great to have you, Boris.
So thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I certainly hope that we can make a lot of progress quite fast on trade. We've got our Secretary of State for International Trade and Trust is here. We hope to get going on that, always remembering that the NHS is not for sale, but everything else, because there's a huge amount we can do. And I guess we'll also talk a bit about Iran and some of those difficult issues where I think we share a common perspective. Dial things down, but also make sure that people get the wrong idea about what they can get away with. That's a complicated issue. We hope to make progress there as well.
We'll be talking about many things, and we look forward to it, and we'll start in just a minute. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Some of your critics are saying that you should resign because you misled the Queen with regard to shutting Parliament down. How do you respond to that?
Well, as I said earlier, let's be absolutely clear. We respect in our respect the court. I disagree profoundly with what they had to say. I think it was entirely right to go ahead with a plan for a Queen's speech. This is the longest period we haven't had a Queen's speech for 400 years. We've got a dynamic domestic agenda we need to get on with. More police on the streets, investment in our National Health Service, improving our education. We need to get on that. And we need to get on with Brexit. That's the overwhelming view of the British people. Whether they get this thing done by October the 31st. And that's what we're going to do.
Mr. President.
That was a very nasty question from a great American reporter.
Was that an American
That's
report?
an American
Was it
reporter.
very nice? I think
good one.
But I think he was asking a question, to be fair, that a lot of British reporters would have asked.
Now that we have that out of the way. He's not, I'll tell you, I know him well. He's not going anywhere. Don't worry about him. Okay, go ahead. Any other questions?
Any advice from the Prime Minister as how he should deal with the judges?
No, I think he's dealing very well. Everything I see is what, look, I watch it very closely. He's a friend of mine. I tend to watch friends closer than enemies, but the enemies you have to watch in a different way. I think he's doing very well. It's a complicated subject, but they took a vote, and the vote was, I was there. I happened to be there the day of that
Were you there on the vote?
I made a prediction even. I even made a prediction. It was a correct prediction. And, you know, that was a long time ago, and it takes a man like this to get it done. And they have to get it done. Otherwise, it'd be a terrible thing to do it any other way. I don't see another vote. I don't see anything happening. I think he's done.
Do you think you will? What was your reaction when you heard these UK Supreme Court decisions? What was your reaction?
I had just Boris. Another day in the office. He's a professional. It's just another day in the office.
Yeah, well, it's tomorrow's another day in Parliament. That's what it is.
You know, we had the first couple of months. We had been, I think we were 0 for 7 with the Supreme Court. And since then, we won the wall, we won asylum, we won some of the biggest ones. We've had a great streak going. But we started off, we were 0 for 7, and then as you will.
So what your plans are,
the
mate?
first time we won, you were like shocked that we won. And since then, we've won a lot of decisions. So I'm sure that's going to happen to you.
Well, we're not counting our chickens, and we're full of respect, as I say, for the justices of our Supreme Court. But we're gonna push on. We're gonna respect what the court say. I think that's what the British people want.
In other words, he's been very nice to the court, friends. Okay. Total respect for the court. Yeah, Jeff.
Explain why it's Ukraine.
That other countries also the only one paying Ukraine. And I've been talking about this for a long time, not only with respect to Ukraine, but a lot of other countries. But frankly, why is Germany? I just met with the Chancellor. Why isn't Germany? Why isn't France? Why are these other countries paying? Why are we paying all the time? And nobody's given, I believe, more to Ukraine. You know, President Obama used to send tank weapons and a lot of things to Ukraine. We think that's very important. And both, by the way, I don't know if you know it or not, that payment was made. But I wanted to get other countries. Other countries should also pay. Because frankly, it affects them more. I mean, that's a barrier, that's a wall between Russia and the UK. And they don't pay. And why are they not paying? Why is it always the United States that's paying? And I made that loud and clear. I told that to Mick Mulvaney. I told it to a lot of people listening, wherever he is. I told it to a lot of different people. I told it to Mike. I told it to two Mikes. I told it to Steve. I keep asking the same. I said it to Wilbur Ross. I keep asking the same question. Why is it that the United States is always paying these foreign countries and other foreign countries that frankly are much more effective, they're not? So I said, hold it up, let's get other people to pay, and then everybody called me, oh, please, can we pay? And I said, and there was never any quid pro quo. The letter was beautiful. It was a perfect letter. It was unlike Biden's, who, by the way, what he said was a horror. And ask how his son made millions of dollars from Ukraine, made millions of dollars from China, even though he had no expertise whatsoever. So what he did was a real problem. With us, there was no pressure applied, no nothing. Okay, folks, thank you very much. Thank you.
So, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Well, that was a bit glitchy.
Been leaked a document from the heart of government which reveals the exact words that Attorney General Geoffrey Cox used on a conference call last month when he was outlining the legal argument in...
This is an extraordinary and precarious moment in our country's history. The Prime Minister has been found to have acted illegally when he tried to shut down Parliament.
So what?
Right, trying to find what else I can find, but I don't know what else to put on. Go to today's news, Sky News. Just looking to see what news I can show.
Well, we often hear hyperbole at moments like this, but it is no exaggeration today saying this is the most significant and historic constitutional court ruling that we've had in all of our lifetimes. I mean, let's just be blunt about the significance of that ruling. It is found that the Prime Minister acted unlawfully in seeking to prorogue, that he had no reason for doing so, that in fact it was about evading scrutiny and closing down parliamentary accountability at a time of political and constitutional crisis in the country. I think what should happen now, firstly, is that Parliament should be back in session. I understand from my colleagues in the House of Commons that Parliament is likely to be back in session tomorrow morning.
She's just as bad as
I
this like Scottish lady there,
I'm going
guys.
to be blunter than Jeremy Corbyn was in the clip I've just heard. I think Boris Johnson should resign. This is a Prime Minister who has been found by the UK Supreme Court to have acted unlawfully, seeking to evade scrutiny and without good reason. And if the rules of democracy are anything, I think the Prime Minister with any honour would tender his resignation today.
What about the Queen's position?
Well, I think the issue here is the behaviour of the Prime Minister. The Queen presented with the proposal, as is the way these, as I understand it, normally happens. This is about the conduct and the behaviour of the Prime Minister. It should be, had he not so to Parliament, accountable to Parliament. And I think the focus today should be on that. So I do believe, and I stress I think if rules of democracy are to mean anything, if accountability is to mean anything, then this is a Prime Minister that is not fit for office. Parliament's principal priority should continue to be to block a no-deal Brexit at the end of October. But if the Prime Minister isn't prepared to do the decent and honourable thing in tendering his resignation, then I think Parliament should quickly come together to force him out of office.
Today is not a win for any individual or cause. It's a win for parliamentary sovereignty, the separation of powers and the independence of our British courts. Crucially, today's ruling confirms that the nation is governed by the rule of law. Laws that everyone, even the Prime Minister, is not above. Do not let government play down the spirit of the judgment today. A unanimous judgment. They have spoken unequivocally. And what I say to the Prime Minister is to repeat Lady Hale's words: the order was a blank piece of paper. Parliament was not prorogued. MPs should turn up for work tomorrow and get on with scrutinising this government. I would like to express my sincere thanks to my legal team, Lord Panic, Tom Hickman, Mishcon Derea. We have had twice in 3 years to come to the Supreme Court to ensure that the government does not put itself above the law. The ruling today speaks volumes. The Minister must open the doors of Parliament tomorrow. MPs must get back and be brave and bold in holding this unscrupulous government to account. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. Cameron.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things that really stood out to me when I was reading your book and what you said about the referendum campaign was that you said that at the beginning of that campaign you felt like winners in waiting. Were you a bit arrogant?
Not at all. I always, from the moment I called the referendum, I knew that it was going to be a huge fight and incredibly difficult. What I meant by that phrase was that the economic argument we had, I felt really on top of that. The single market was important to jobs, important to businesses. We had so many businesses on our side, so many experts making these arguments. It felt like a winning hand. And then I try and tell the story in the book of how the winner became the winner.
We understand the need of the country, did you? That's the truth.
No, I don't accept that, actually. If you go back, although I was a modernising conservative, I was one of the first politicians in a long time to make very serious speeches and attempts to get immigration under control, which I think was a huge concern to people. And politicians have been pushing it to one side for too long. And I think the mood of feeling that globalisation and the economic crisis and culturally and that change had been too fast, I think we did understand that. But as I say in the book, we didn't do enough to address it. But I think we we were trying to answer the right questions, but we needed to move faster and harder.
And you're a student. Does it pain you that you'll go down in history as the man?
Well, it pains me what I see has happened since, because we've had 3 years of a hiatus. We seem stuck. Now, to be fair to Theresa May, she produced a deal for us to leave the EU, and I think it was wrong for the people who most wanted Brexit to reject that deal, which is why we are where we are. But as I try and explain in the book, that I believed our position in the EU was becoming unsafe and unstable, particularly after the treaty veto in 2011, where we had genuine concerns, but the EU just pushed ahead and had a treaty anyway. Same people, same offices, same tables, same chairs, and it showed they could do things without unanimity. We needed to fix that. And that is where the renegotiation and the referendum came from.
I want to know your thoughts on the current state of the Conservative Party. I interviewed Sanjima last weekend, someone who was your parliamentary private secretary as Prime Minister. He's then joined the Lib Dems. And he said to me, if I want to fight in politics for liberal values, and the Conservative Party is no longer the place to be, that liberal conservatism is slipping away.
I do worry, but I think Sam, who I admire enormously, he's a friend and was a great PPS to me. I think he has, because although Brexit dominates everything at the moment, if for one moment you just leave it to one side and look at what the Conservative Party is today, it is totally different to the one that I inherited in 2005. It has got a far better gender balance, it's got far more people from across the country, it represents seats in the North and Midlands and not just the South. And if you listen to the concerns of Conservative MPs, they are talking about education reform, installed opportunity, and tackling modern slavery, and all those issues, and environmentalism and green causes. So we need to deal with Brexit. But is the cause of a modern, compassionate Conservative Party lost? Absolutely not.
Now we've got to talk about the Queen. One of the first rules in politics.
I think I've said everything I want to say, so you can ask me questions, but I'm going to say very, very little.
I will ask you the questions. One of the first rules in politics is that you don't talk about private conversations with the Queen, and you've done that twice. Firstly, you were recorded saying she purred down the line to you when you told her the results of the Scottish referendum, and secondly, you've now revealed as well that you asked her to raise an eyebrow.
Actually, I was, what I said in that programme, and I don't want to add to it in any way, was about conversations between my aides and her aides, actually, so what you asked is not actually correct, but I don't want to say anymore.
You've been indiscreet.
I don't want to say anymore, and I'm going to leave it at that.
The royal family, a source at Buckingham Palace has said that your comments caused displeasure. I mean, that means they're furious in royal family speak, doesn't it?
I think I've said everything I want to say about this subject.
And you're the one who's brought this up, though. You're the person who has made these revelations.
Yeah, and the context was, as I said, that Alex Salmond was saying that Her Majesty would be the proud monarch of an independent Scotland. There was a frustration in my team, and that's why the conversations between one set of aides and another set of aides took place. But that's it.
I mean, it's clear that you feel uncomfortable talking about this. Are you sorry?
Well, I don't want to say any more because I don't want to make the situation worse than it is. So you can go on asking questions, but I'm not going to say any more.
Okay, recording government then. Because for many people, your government was symbolic of austerity. Between 2010 and 2016, the number of people sleeping rough doubled. Food bank usage went up. I mean, you were talking about compassionate conservatism. Is that the record of compassionate conservatism?
Well, the record of the government is that we cut the budget deficit by 2/3. We created 2.5 million jobs. There were 1 million more businesses. We became the fastest growing economy in the G7. Inequality fell. The number of people in poverty fell. The number of households where no one worked fell massively. We ended up with an economy with more people in work than at any time in our history. I'm not saying we solved all the economic problems of the UK, but the programme worked. Britain was a standout economic success story by 2014, 2015, when we went back to the electorate and won a fresh mandate.
But some of these impacts take some time to be felt. I mean, how many police officers did you cut?
Well, we did have to make cuts to many public services because we were living way beyond our means. I mean, I became Prime Minister in 2010 when Britain was forecast to have the biggest budget deficit anywhere in the world.
So how
and what we demonstrated was that you could reduce police budgets while continuing to cut them and actually trying to increase the number of neighbourhood officers that were on the front line. And that is what happened. And there was some wastage and inefficiency in all of these public services. And we had to do something about that. As I say, I'm happy to be judged on what happened to the number one task of that government was turn the economy around, create jobs, give people a better chance in life. We did those things.
My question was how many police officers were cut. It was 20,000 police officers. And although I do acknowledge that you say that crime fell while you were Prime Minister, what many feel has happened since then is that crime has gone up. So, for example, if we just look at since 2011, the number of offences involving knives increased by 30%. Cressida Dick, the head of the Met Police, says there is some link between violent crime on the streets, obviously, and police numbers. Of course there is, and everybody would see that. Do you see that?
I think the mistake made, knife crime has many causes, many things that we need to do to tackle it. And I absolutely think it was right of Sajid Javid, when he was Home Secretary, to look again at stop and search, because actually the number of police officers clearly has an impact, but as big an impact is what are they doing? And
so
if you're not using,
do you acknowledge then that
I think the key thing was the stop and search. That's what needed to change. And as I say, as we reduced police budgets, actually we were able to make sure that there was more on the front line. That's absolutely crucial. But if you're asking me, did we make difficult decisions? Yes, of course we did. But we had no choice. I mean, I've been quiet for the last 3 years, but it sometimes driven me mad to hear that somehow austerity was a political choice, that there were other alternatives. We faced a clear and present danger of having such a massive budget deficit. We had to sort that out. And we did it, and did it in a way where inequality fell, poverty fell, and we got many more people into work. We cut jobs from the private sector. Yes, we had to actually replace those, not one fund with jobs in the private sector, but 5 for 1. 5 jobs created in the private sector for every job lost in the public sector.
You see, many people will be listening to you now. They'll read what you said in the book, which is that we probably didn't cut enough, and they'll think, you don't get it.
When you win an election on the basis of saying, as we did very clearly, we're going to have to make difficult decisions, we're going to have to make cuts, there is an argument for not having to make more and more difficult decisions in year 2, 3, and 4, but try and do more things earlier. And I try and be frank in the book about things that we got right and things that we got wrong.
And what you say in the book is my assessment now is that we didn't cut enough. We could have done more, even more quickly.
Yeah, earlier, I think that's the point. Is I think we could look. We had to make difficult decisions, including putting up some taxes, which we did. We had a balanced program, we ended up with the top 1% ending up paying 27% of all the income tax take, which is the highest it's ever been in our history.
Well, you also cut the top rate of tax.
But we actually, what's much more important than the actual tax rates is who's paying what, and the top in our country are paying 27% of the take. That's the and I think you should judge governments on that more than what the headline rates are. Very catchy, great for budgets, but really what matters is who's paying.
I mean, you're talking about difficult decisions, but in an interview this week, when you ask of an example of something that perhaps you got a bit wrong, you said forestry. Well, again, people, you just don't get, you don't understand it.
Well, I do understand it. There were many difficult decisions. I was just trying to think of an example of something where an enormous amount of controversy was caused by a change that was not sort of core to what we were trying to do. And I'm sure there are other examples. That's right.
And Boris Johnson has now said that austerity is at an end. He's turned the spending tax back on. Is that a mistake?
No, I think it's great that because we took difficult decisions and we got that budget deficit down, that we are able to spend more. I mean, if you go back to what I said when I was leader of the opposition, when the economy grows, what you ought to do is share the proceeds of growth between extra public spending, keeping people's taxes down, and making sure that your debt position is sustainable. Don't forget that having a debt GDP is terribly important. I know that sounds very dry, but what it really means is when the next crisis comes along, do you have the capacity to step in and help with the extra public spending you might need in some areas and tax reductions you might need in some areas? So keep an eye on that would be my advice to Boris, as well as, quite rightly, spending some more money on key public services now that we're able to.
Fix the roof when the sun's shining.
Fix the roof when the sun's shining is a good motto.
Have you given any advice to Boris Johnson?
I have. We text each other from time to time. I haven't had a meeting with him since he's been Prime Minister. He's very busy. He knows my views on most things. The most important thing he is trying to do, he has my support for, which is going to Brussels, getting a deal, bringing that deal back, and trying to end this period of uncertainty. And I wish him well as he does that.
Have you taken advice?
On that, he is, I think, has won. Whether I can't claim to be the author of that, that was something he wanted to do, but I'm encouraging him. No deal is not a good idea. Breaking the law is not a good idea. Focus everything you've got on getting that deal, and that's what he's doing, to be fair to him.
What have you been doing since you've...
I'm president of Alzheimer's Research UK, which is a charity that's battling hard to try and find some solutions to the dementia crisis that we face. In government, we did a lot to increase research and to increase awareness about dementia. So I'm giving that a lot of attention. I'm still with the National Citizen Service, the youth volunteering program I set up that 1 in 6 16-year-olds did this summer. I do some work with the Oxford School of Government and others on how we help the most fragile states. I want to continue the legacy of the fact we did meet the 0.7% target for aid. And even in difficult circumstances, we should remember there are people living in dire poverty on the other side of the world. And it's a moral cause, but it's also a cause that's right for us. I mean, these problems come and visit us if we don't deal with them at source. So those are some of the things I'm doing while I finish the book, so perhaps I have a bit more time to do some other things.
How much have you earned since leaving office?
I haven't counted up. I run a small office of 5 people, or 6 people actually, since we've been doing the book, and I am giving all the profits of the book, so after I've paid for the editors and researchers, the profits of the book will all go to charities, chiefly charities, disabled children's charities, and charities for our armed services, who, I think you feel that responsibility on behalf.
I mean, you've been doing quite a lot of, after this speech as well. Are we talking about in the region of £1 million, even the Tony Blair levels? Or?
I'm on your show to talk about politics, political issues, the books, rather than other stuff. So.
Okay. One of the things that I will very much remember after reading your book is the way you talk about the family, and in particular, of course, about your son Ivan. And I just wonder, going through something like that as a family gives you a different perspective when it comes to the political issues that you get asked about all the time, Brexit, austerity.
I think it gives you a perspective. It changes the perspective because we all experience the NHS. We go to our GP when we get ill. We go to A&E. We all have different experiences, but the intensity when you have a profoundly disabled child, of social workers, night carers, tubes, medicines, tube feedings, seizures, A&E over and over again, nights in hospitals, different scans, different checks, different tests. The intensity of it all, and the amazing side of our health service you see, district nurses that are just incredibly dedicated. I think that gives you a perspective. I think also, it can affect families in lots of different ways. But I think with us, it brought us closer together. We thought we've got to cope with this. We don't know quite what we're doing. We didn't volunteer for it. We've got to make it work, and I think it brought us closer. But it's really your friends, I think, notice this almost more than you do, because you're living in the middle of it. But some friends said to me, I think it changed your outlook and your thinking and who you were a bit, and I kind of think they're probably right.
I think when you were saying that they brought you together, that comes across, with you and Samantha as well. Is she something to politics?
Yes, she's not a political junkie. She's interested, but she has a very good sort of 40,000-foot view, and so sometimes I'll be wrestling with something, and she'll be very good at when I explain it to her. She'd say, well, obviously, do this. That's what she's quite good at getting you to back out of the detail and see the big picture.
Has she ever influenced any of your policies?
Yes, I think. I mentioned this before on gay marriage, where I was journey towards gay marriage. I backed civil church, and I was thinking this is the answer to make it equal. But she was influential because I was sort of like the man under the bonnet, trying to fix. Well, it's not fair if gay couples can't inherit property or have hospital visiting rights, or let's fix this. And she was sort of going, well, never mind all that. That's important, but think of the big picture. If gay people want to get married, that doesn't make our marriage worth less. Why not have proper marriage equality? And that was when the sort of light bulb went off. So sometimes she was very good at the big picture, also incredibly supportive and helpful at times of stress and difficulty, of which there are many.
And then just finally, you've been in the background, shall we say, for a couple of years now, and have now burst back onto the political scene, doing a lot of interviews. Looking forward to going back to the Shepherd's Hut, having a bit of a quiet life?
Yes. I think ex-prime ministers should, on the whole, let their successors get on with it. I've tried to do that for 3 years. Theresa May had a very difficult job. Boris has got a difficult job. I don't want to give a running commentary. I was very lucky when I first became Tory leader. Every single previous Tory leader was on my side, briefly. Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Michael Howard, Ian Duncan Smith, William Hague. And it gives you an enormous ability and strength to get on with the job. So I will try not to be what Linton Crosby used to call me. From time I'm sure I have something to say, but I'm looking forward. You know, I've wanted to say my book and let people read it and judge it themselves. But I promise this Cam Fest is coming to an end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is it? Oh, I don't know, mate. What it is.
Just days ago, millions of people took to the streets across the world, demanding more action on climate change. Now leaders gather at the United Nations in New York, where Luis Alfonso de Alba is in charge of the climate summit. His message: the Paris Climate Agreement is no longer enough.
The biggest problem we have is that we need to increase it. If we fulfill the commitments that were made in Paris in 2015, we will still be very much below what is needed. The latest reports of the scientific community tell us that we need to double and in some cases to triple what we have committed in Paris.
But there's a problem with this ambition. Far from doing more, America, one of the world's biggest polluters, is pulling out of the Paris Accord.
Can the world really make the progress it needs to while Donald Trump is in office?
No one is telling us that they are going to wait for others to move before they do. And that's
So
very
moving on
encouraging.
Donald Trump.
The majority is one. This is not a problem for 2030, 2050. Actions need to take place today.
Former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is optimistic. Big polluters like China and the UK are expected to make new commitments. And eventually, he thinks the US will fall into...
I'm sure that the United States will have to return to this, because climate change does not respect the national borders. The United States is just one of there's a planet Earth. The nature does not negotiate with the human society.
But there are other geopolitical headwinds creating challenges.
The countries gathering here at the United Nations in New York for the climate summit have been told that if they even want a speaking slot, they have to bring enhanced commitments and concrete plans. There's a lot going on in the world right now that might make that more difficult, like escalating trade issues between China and the US, tensions with Iran, and Brexit. The kind of things that make countries focus on their own needs, and collective action on anything much harder to achieve.
With the eyes of the world on the United Nations, the pressure to do more on climate change is building, along with the cost of doing nothing. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in New York.
Josh, who's going to bring us up to date with just, I mean, Sky News Radio, it's a central part of...
Too long of a video. I'm trying to see what else I could show because it's some long videos in it.
Want to visit multiple destinations but don't know where to start? Try Nomad. Nomad builds
is in New York. So Beth, first of all, the government has made a very like this decision, but it has no option other than. But if you thought that Boris Johnson might have a change of heart following this decision by the Supreme Court today, truly momentous. Think again, because he's doubling down, he's carrying on, he's not going to resign, he's not going to ask for extension, he's going to face down Parliament. As one senior government source said to me, this is not an attempt to have a battle with the courts. This is an iteration of the battle within Parliament being played out in the courts, but it doesn't change anything in terms of the gridlock in Parliament. It doesn't change anything in the terms of the Prime Minister's strategy. And certainly I think those in his camp still feel that he is on the right side of the people when it comes to Brexit, and that actually it's Parliament and some of his challenges in court
that are trying to frustrate that. I should also say that there is a bit of disquiet about the courts. Some anonymous briefings today from sources around Downing Street having a bit of a go at the Supreme Court. And as I understand it, the conference call within the Cabinet has just finished. I've been told that it was apparently, I've just got it here, the Cabinet, the mood was to move on and concentrate on political battles ahead. But I do understand the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, said attacks on impartiality of judges should not occur and the judgment of the court should be respected, the rule of law paramount.
Okay, well, let's talk more about law and indeed the legal advice given to government and given the Prime Minister the Times. And a lot of people asking, what was the Attorney General, Geoffrey, telling?
So earlier today, Sky News revealed the minuted advice that Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General, gave to the Cabinet on that telephone conference call a few weeks ago, just after Boris Johnson had informed the Queen that he was going to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks, that decision that was overturned today. Geoffrey Cox told the Cabinet that it was lawful and that it was constitutional to do what they were doing, and anybody that said otherwise was basically playing politics. Beyond that, in the last half hour, I've learned that there isn't exactly a great big document that anybody else can ask for in Parliament and elsewhere. There's no full legal advice. There's a little bit of a couple of emails here and there, but there is no substantive document beyond that minuted Cabinet conference call. What does that tell us? Well, that the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, was incredibly confident, it would seem, the day would happen. So unanimous decision by the other justices does look as something of an extreme embarrassment. One of the reasons why Labour Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer has called for him to consider resigning. Just another wave of bad news for Boris Johnson as he continues his schedule here in New York. He watched that decision at 4:30 in the morning by the Supreme Court, read out by Lady Hale, before plunging into meetings with aides. Tried as hard as he humanly can to continue with his schedule with meetings with business leaders, Donald Trump, Leo Varadkar. That one's just finished now. He flies back overnight, but my God, does he fly back into a storm.
Sam, I'm going to take you off there because there's so much to discuss, and I just want to get back to, well, then tomorrow. And this from Beth, this from Jeremy Corbyn. He wants the Prime Minister to resign, but of course it's in his hands to call a vote of no confidence to get rid of it.
This is really fascinating what's it's emerging at the moment. Look, what's going on is Jeremy Corbyn doesn't want to call a vote of no confidence. The argument that the Labour front bench would make is that they're worried that if they call a vote of no confidence, we could just drop out of the EU. What they want first is to make sure that Boris Johnson asks for the extension. That is what they are
putting, which he's legally required to do.
Which he's legally required to do. What's interesting, though, is that the SNP, they do want a vote of no confidence. They do want Jeremy Corbyn to call a vote of no confidence. And as I understand it, they would be quite relaxed about Jeremy Corbyn even stepping in as an interim Prime Minister. The problem is, and Jeremy Corbyn knows it, if he calls the vote of no confidence, he probably won't win it, because for all of those people that are very unhappy in the Commons with Boris Johnson, say the 21 Rebel MPs now without the Conservative whip, for example, they are not prepared to have Jeremy Corbyn as an interim Prime Minister. So while they moan and call for Boris Johnson to resign, he's sitting tight saying, bring it on.
Bring it on, yeah.
Force me out or give me my election. The other thing I would say, just quickly, is that Boris Johnson's team are clear on one thing, and it guides everything they do. He won't ask for an extension. It's political suicide for him.
Well, let me ask Sam what he thinks he might do. Won't ask for an extension. Might he apologise to the House of Commons tomorrow?
Well, there was no hint of apology today. It was defiant. He said he'd respect the law when we talked to him earlier, but to all intents and purposes, he sounds like he wants to progress on with his policy as it is. There are cabinet nerves about the strategy and a very strong unwillingness to break the law, as Beth Rippey was saying, Robert Buckland said to the cabinet conference call just now. But as far as we can possibly tell, he has one strategy, and he's going to keep going with it because there are no other options under the way that he's framed this debate and seems to want to carry it out.
Okay, well, thank you both, as always, for your expert analysis. Sam Coates-Beth with me. Talk more very soon, and we'll be discussing all these developments further in our press preview at 10:30 this evening with the comment editor of City AM, Rachel Cunliffe, and the editor of Spiked, Brendan O'Neill. Now then, the decision by the 11 judges will go down, of course, as one of the most astonishing moments in political and constitutional history. And as we now know, the result is that the House of Commons will be sitting again from tomorrow at 11:30 in the morning. Our political correspondent, Lewis Goodall, hears from the MPs who can't wait to get started again.
It cleared up quickly enough, but the Supreme Court judgment won't. It was a constitutional cyclone. Straight away, Parliament will return at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. Indeed, many MPs already have, as they've been making clear on Twitter. And Boris Johnson will be straight back into the bear pit, facing a Parliament where, with no majority, he is at the Commons' mercy.
I was rather hopeful that he resumed Parliament this afternoon. In fact, I think, to be fair to him, he's done it at the soonest opportunity, which is 11:30 tomorrow morning. So I'm going to be back there in the chamber tomorrow.
There is talk that Parliament will be asked to vote on a short conference recess to allow Tory conference to go ahead, but Labour and others have said they won't back it. Instead, opposition MPs are likely to seize control of the Commons Order paper once more.
We will be working together with opposition parties in the way that we have done effectively throughout the summer, and looking at means of making sure that our main priority, and our main priority remains, is ensuring that we do not leave, the United Kingdom does not leave the European Union the end of October in a no-deal scenario.
If Boris Johnson does try and ignore Parliament's wishes to extend Article 50, then we might end up right back where we started.
If Boris Johnson refuses to extend, the Benn bill is very, very clear. He must extend. He must send that letter. He must request that extension. If he does not, if necessary, it will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And that hasn't gone very well for the Prime Minister today.
There have been some dark mutterings from Number 10 about a second prorogation, but after today, that seems impossible.
If the Prime Minister wants to go ahead with the Queen's speech on the 17th of October in 2.5 weeks' time, he has to prorogue. Now, if he does so for a few days, over that weekend, for example, that's absolutely fine. The High Court has made it clear that's lawful. If he were to prorogue over the 31st of October, assuming that's the crucial time for Brexit, that's a very different thing, and people would be going back to the courts and saying, tell the Prime Minister he simply can't do that.
So in every direction, it feels like checkmate. The Prime Minister is constrained by two fundamental truths. He cannot extend Article 50, and yet he must. He's constrained in two equal and opposite directions, one political, one legal. If he cannot secure a deal, he will be forced to choose between the two, to risk losing all political credibility or acting unlawfully again and straining our constitution even further. In the 62 days he's been Prime Minister, Boris Johnson has pushed the limits of our constitution. In short, today, it pushed back. Lewis Goodall, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, joining me now is Johnny Moore, QC, a barrister and director of the Good Law Project. He was, of course, also one of the people behind the case against prorogation, put before a Scottish court for a session that led all the way to today's historic decision in the Supreme Court. Very good to see you. You must have been heartened and indeed felt vindicated by this decision. For you, is it just a reaffirmation that the law always comes first?
I mean, I'm relieved, actually, because I've never been able to imagine a world in which the Prime Minister is right. I can't understand what is left of parliamentary democracy if it were true that the Prime Minister could suspend Parliament every time it threatened to do something he didn't like. That would hollow out parliamentary democracy to a nothing. So I've never actually been able to contemplate the possibility of losing.
But given that, of course, a different case, but along similar lines, lost in the High Court in England, and you must have had a feeling at certain points during the Supreme Court hearings that they might cite that view.
No, I didn't, is the honest answer. And, you know, I come at this as a trial lawyer, so I'm very used to reading courts as an advocate.
What were the tells then, to use a poker term? I mean, what did you read then in the questioning, and indeed even the body language of the 11 justices of the Supreme Court?
Nothing much from the body language, not the Supreme Court, although in the inner house there was a moment where one of the judges was so angry at what he was being told by the government that I saw he put his hand over his mouth so that the government lawyer couldn't see his anger. In the Supreme Court, it's much more about the questions that they're asking. Those questions tell you what they're interested in. and they also lead you to a view about how they're thinking about the arguments before them.
Okay, so what happens? It is being said, of course, this Prime Minister wants to have a Queen's speech. Quite reasonable to expect a new Prime Minister, certainly one that hasn't been elected in a general election, to have a Queen's speech. Pretty much could do that. Well, he could do that tomorrow, couldn't he? He could and then go back to a sitting Parliament, prorogue it again.
Perfectly reasonable for him to want a Queen's speech. I think in the real world, until we pass that 31st of October deadline, the notion that anyone's going to be focusing on a domestic legislative agenda, I think, is for the birds. So I can't really understand how he could lawfully prorogue Parliament again. But that's not to say that he'll do it. If he's a man who is prepared to bear the political cost attached to losing repeatedly in the courts, he can prorogue Parliament over and over and over again and lose over and over and over again, but he will disrupt the workings of Parliament over and over and over again, and that's obviously a very unsatisfactory state of affairs.
And it was very interesting today hearing Baroness Hale, how she expressed the decision and repeatedly made it very clear it is nothing to do with Brexit. This is about sovereignty and supremacy between Parliament, the government, Parliament and the executive.
Yes, and I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Brexit is not the backdrop against which this point arose, but the point is of profound importance. Those who are Boris Johnson supporters who are feeling a little unhappy today about how the Supreme Court decided should be asking themselves how they would feel if Jeremy Corbyn was Prime Minister and he did not want Parliament interfering with his agenda, if he didn't want Parliament stopping him nationalising assets, for example, or closing private schools, or whatever the policy is in question. So, there is something here really quite important that goes far, far beyond Brexit.
And was it about the length of time fundamentally? I mean, just to explain to lay people, it was about the time of the prorogation. I mean, of course, the Prime Minister does right to prorogue Parliament, but it was the length of time. It seemed unnecessary, not much explanation from the government about why.
It wasn't really the length of time, I think. The length of time was a feature of the landscape. It was more about the precise moment at which it happened. So as I've already said, the notion that we're going to be paying attention to a domestic legislative agenda at the moment, every journalist will tell you, you'll know yourself, is just a nonsense. You're putting your hand over your mouth, just like the Supreme Court in-house judged it. So part of it is the timing of the prorogation in the run-up to the 31st, and part of it was a sense that he was doing it to put Parliament out. Nicky da Costa, his Director of Legislative Affairs, wrote a piece for The Spectator a couple of months ago saying, well, here's a way in which you could stop Parliament interfering.
The justices looked at. So, I mean, just further ahead, because we heard Boris Johnson say it again and again and again, keeps saying Britain is leaving the European Union on October the 31st. Now, if he doesn't get a deal, then he's required by a law passed by Parliament very quickly because it had been prorogued. Perhaps that backfired, that tactic, but he's required by law to ask the EU for an extension. Well, if he doesn't do that, is he back before the Supreme Court?
I think he'll likely be back before the Supreme Court, come what may. We have another case in the Inner House in Scotland. That case asks him to commit to the court to delivering on the instruction in the Act that Parliament passed before it was prorogued, the instruction to ask for an extension if no deal has been agreed by the 19th of October. And he said that he will, in certain circumstances at least, he will not comply with that instruction. And if he does not, then we are in very difficult...
When do you get that decision then, just very briefly?
Well, the case has yet to be argued, but my expectation is that the case will be heard, I think it's in the week commencing the 14th of October in the Supreme Court, and there'll be a hearing in the Inner House before then.
Johnny Moore, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. And you're watching a Sky News Tonight Supreme Court special programme. Coming up, Jeremy Corbyn calls for Boris Johnson to step down as Prime Minister. Welcome back to this special edition of Sky News Tonight on the government's Supreme Court defeat. Well, while the judges were delivering their decision in central London, the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, was preparing to make his big speech at the Labour Party conference in Brighton. It was brought forward from tomorrow because of the resumption of business in Parliament, and Mr Corbyn made it clear that he wants the Prime Minister to tell the House of Commons that he is resigning. From Brighton, our political correspondent, Kate McCann, reports.
A hastily rewritten conference speech a day early and featuring heavy criticism of the Prime Minister at its heart.
Boris Johnson has been found to have misled the country. This unelected Prime Minister should now resign.
After days of questions about party unity over Brexit, Labour united in opposition.
He thinks he's above us all. He's part of an elite that disdains democracy. I tell you this, I don't think he's fit, Prime Minister.
Jeremy Corbyn to call to be stopped short of doing so today, amid fears it will increase the chance of leaving the EU without a deal.
This crisis can only be settled with a general election. That election needs to take place as soon as this government's threat of a disastrous no deal is taken off the table.
Despite the focus on Boris Johnson and Brexit, there was policy too.
We will create a new, publicly owned, generic drugs manufacturer to supply cheaper medicines to our NHS.
And an opportunity to rattle off some previous crowd-pleasing announcements.
A Labour government will mean better wages, greater security and more say, putting power in the hands of people. And we will bring rail, mail, water and the national grid into public ownership.
A conference dogged by divisions, a speech here in Brighton was to bring his MPs and delegates together as Jeremy Corbyn rounded on a Prime Minister under pressure. There were policy announcements too in this hastily rewritten speech before MPs hot-footed back to London. But the question is, Jeremy Corbyn says he wants to be a new type of Prime Minister, yet he stopped short today of offering to trigger a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson. So when will that election come, and can he hold his party together until it does?
The message is clear, but the timetable isn't. Kate McCann, Sky News.
And this is a Sky News Tonight Supreme Court special programme. Now coming up, I'm going to be discussing today's decision with Jack Simpson-Head from the legal commentator Catherine Banksy and Professor Robert Hazel, Professor of British Politics at UCL.
Well, guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like I say, this is it for this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll do another video like this later. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Good night, guys.